He hit her in front of everyone when he found out she was having a girl at the gender reveal party, and the ending left everyone speechless. What should have been a moment of joy turned into a nightmare. But what no one imagined was the strength Marisol had inside her before it all began. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now get ready for this shocking story. The murmur of the guests filled the restaurant, along with the clinking of glasses and the sound of dishes coming out of the kitchen. Marisol looked at herself in the bathroom mirror one last time before leaving. Her light blue dress hugged her 8-month belly, and although her smile was serene, her eyes betrayed the nervousness she was trying to hide. She ran her hands through her hair and took a deep breath. Today was an important day. The gender reveal was something most women looked forward to, but for her, it meant something more. It was a silent test, a moment that would define how the remaining months of her pregnancy would be. She adjusted the fabric of her dress over her belly and left the bathroom. The restaurant was full of familiar faces. Her mother was excitedly chatting with her aunts, while her brother Javier held a glass of wine and talked with some cousins. The place was warm, lit by the soft light of the chandeliers, but at the other end of the room, at the bar, was Diego, dressed in his chef's jacket, with his back to the crowd, drinking with his kitchen colleagues. His broad shoulders and rigid posture contrasted with the joy that floated in the air. He had not approached Marisol all night. She swallowed and walked over to him. Diego said softly, touching his arm. He turned his head, barely looking at her directly. "What happened? We're about to start." Diego finished his last drink and left the glass on the bar. Finally, he looked at her, and although he smiled, his eyes did not shine. "Let's go then." Without taking her hand, he walked in front of her to the center of the room, where a large screen was set up. Marisol tried to convince herself that he was just nervous, that the idea of being a father had him tense, but deep down, she knew it was not just that. Since he found out about the pregnancy, Diego had made it very clear what he expected. "I'm going to have a child, Marisol. A boy. Someone to carry on my legacy." Every time he talked about the baby, he referred to it as a boy. He never mentioned the possibility of it being a girl. And although Marisol tried to downplay it, there was something in his tone, in the way he said it, that made her feel uncomfortable. They went up together onto the small makeshift stage, while the guests settled in. The party organizer took the microphone and began the countdown. 3. Marisol felt her heart pounding in her chest. 2. Her breathing became shallow. 1. The screen lit up. A vibrant pink covered the entire background, and the word "girl" appeared in large letters. The crowd burst into applause, but Diego's face froze. His jaw tightened, and his stormy dark eyes remained fixed on the screen. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The people near him noticed the change in his expression. His friends from the kitchen stopped applauding. Marisol felt the weight of the air, a feeling of oppression that squeezed her chest. Javier, her brother, looked at Diego with a raised eyebrow. "Aren't you going to congratulate Marisol?" The sound of her name made him react. Diego forced a smile, but it was obvious that something in him had changed. "Yes, of course," he said quietly. Then, leaning close to Marisol's ear, he whispered with a coldness that chilled her blood. "You disappointed me." She felt a shiver run down her spine. Diego walked away from the stage with heavy steps. Some guests noticed his attitude and looked at each other, murmuring. Marisol stood there trying to smile as people approached to congratulate her. But inside, she felt that something was very, very wrong. The party continued. The guests dispersed, returning to their conversations. Music played in the background, and the aroma of freshly served food filled the air. But for Marisol, everything had become distant, as if she were trapped in a bubble of anxiety. She looked for Diego and found him on the other side of the restaurant with his head down, drinking another drink. Javier approached her. "Are you okay, Marisol?" She felt without much conviction. "Yes, of course. I don't like how that jerk reacted." She looked down. "He's just surprised, that's all." Javier narrowed his eyes. "Sure, it's nothing." But it was a lie, because she knew that when the party ended that night, she would have to face his true self, and something inside her told her that it would not be good. Marisol remembered how it all began when she met Diego. He was charming, confident, charismatic, with that protective air that made her feel that nothing could hurt her if she was by his side. He worked as a chef in a promising restaurant in Mexico City and said that one day he would open his own business. He was ambitious and spoke firmly about the future, and at first he seemed like the man any woman would dream of. It was quick. In a few months, Diego asked her to marry him, and she, in love, accepted without hesitation. At first, everything was love, unexpected details, romantic dinners, gifts. Every gesture seemed proof of his devotion, but that intensity began to suffocate her over time. The first sign came when Marisol announced her pregnancy. Diego stood still for a moment, his dark eyes looking at her with an expression that was difficult to decipher, before he smiled. "A son," he murmured, holding the pregnancy test in his hands. Marisol laughed excitedly. "Yes, a baby." He hugged her tightly, but in the midst of the happiness, she felt something strange in his voice, something colder, more distant. And then he said, "It's going to be a boy." The way he said it made her doubt. "Or a girl?" Diego's smile faded slightly. "It won't be a boy. I'm sorry." Marisol didn't want to make a big deal out of it at the time. Maybe it was just enthusiasm, a wish that many men had. But as the weeks went by, he began to repeat it more often. "I already have the name. If it's a boy, I want him to be called Emiliano. And if it's a girl, Diego." He looked at her, as if she had said something absurd. "We're going to have a boy." Marisol tried to take it as a joke, but we can't decide that. "Diego is going to be a boy." His voice was so firm that a chill ran down Marisol's spine. Over time, the idea became an obsession. "I'm going to teach him to cook from an early age. I want him to have his own restaurant someday, to carry the family name high. And if it's a girl," he waved his hand dismissively, as if it didn't matter. "If it's a girl, I hope she doesn't give me any trouble." That phrase stuck in Marisol's mind for days. "I hope she doesn't give me any trouble." What did he mean by that? She noticed that every time someone asked about the baby, Diego always referred to it as a he. He never mentioned the possibility of it being a girl. And then the changes began. At first, they were small things. An annoyed look when she talked too much about the baby's clothes. The awkward silence when she mentioned that she wanted to make a neutral room without focusing on specific colors. The cold tone when she suggested female names. But then, worse things came. When she began to feel more tired and needed support, Diego began to complain. "You're always tired. Other women keep working until the last month. Diego, I'm pregnant." "Well, yes. It's not an illness." Every day he had less patience. The small gestures of affection disappeared. The unexpected gifts became complaints. The romantic dinners were replaced by nights when he came home, ate in silence, and went to bed without even asking how she was. One night, when Marisol mentioned that she wanted to buy some things for the baby, he exploded. "It's silly to spend money. We don't even know if it's a boy or a girl yet." "What's wrong with that?" she asked, frustrated. Diego clenched his jaw, visibly annoyed, because she didn't want pink or girly things in her house. She wasn't going to dress her son like a girl. At that moment, Marisol felt afraid for the first time. Diego had never spoken to her like that before, but that night, visibly annoyed. "I don't want pink or girly things in my house. I'm not going to dress my child like a girl." At that moment, Marisol felt afraid for the first time. Diego had never spoken to her like that before, but that night there was something in his eyes that unsettled her. As the months went by, the distance between them grew. Diego spent more time at the restaurant, claiming he had too much work, and when he was at home, he always seemed to be in a bad mood. Marisol tried to convince herself it was just stress, but deep down, she knew something was very wrong. Then came the gender reveal party, and everything fell apart. Marisol told herself they were small things, insignificant details that shouldn't worry her. Diego had always been a strong man, not one to express his emotions easily. But lately, something in him had changed. It wasn't just the impatience or the comments about wanting a son. It was the way he looked at her, the way his tone became drier, harsher, and then there were the silences. Before, when they talked about the baby, Diego used to touch her belly, ask how she was feeling, tell her he couldn't wait to be a father. But lately, he barely mentioned the pregnancy. If Marisol talked to him about the doctor, about the baby's movements, or about the changes in her body. He simply nodded, without looking up from his phone. Sometimes he didn't even respond. One night, while they were having dinner in the living room, Marisol tried to revive the conversation. "Today at the doctor's office, I heard the baby's heartbeat," she said with a smile. Diego looked at his cell phone. "Just S," he replied. Marisol frowned. "You're not going to be a father?" They were having dinner in the living room. Marisol tried to revive the conversation. "Today at the doctor's office, I heard the baby's heartbeat," she said with a smile to Diego, who was looking at his cell phone. Only in response. Marisol frowned. "Aren't you going to ask me how it sounded?" Diego sighed and put his phone aside with annoyance. "Let's see. Tell me." Marisol felt a knot in her stomach, not because he had asked, but because he had done so as if it were an obligation, as if he didn't care, but she smiled anyway. "Very fast. Like a drum," she continued, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm so excited that soon we'll know if it's a boy or a girl." Diego's jaw tensed. "There's nothing to know. It's a boy." Marisol pressed her lips together, feeling the discomfort grow. "Diego, you can't talk as if that were a fact." He took his glass of water and drank a little before answering. "I already told you. I know." She wanted to insist, but she knew it would be useless. After dinner, Diego locked himself in the bedroom without saying another word. Little by little, Marisol began to notice more changes. There were days when Diego was the man she remembered. Kind, affectionate, even attentive. He would make her breakfast before going to work and hug her while they watched television. But other times, without warning, he would become cold and distant, as if her very presence bothered him. Sometimes, after a cutting remark, he would realize that he had been too harsh and would wrap his arms around her, kissing her forehead. "I'm sorry, love. I've been under a lot of stress at work." Marisol would smile and hug him back, telling herself that everything was fine, that she shouldn't exaggerate, that it wasn't that serious. But fear began to grow inside her, even though she tried to ignore it. And then the first real warning sign appeared. One afternoon, Marisol went out to buy some things for the house. Diego hadn't come home from the restaurant yet, so she decided to take the opportunity to stop by a baby store. She looked at the shelves with a smile, imagining what it would be like when her baby was in her arms. Although she didn't know the sex, she found a white outfit with little star patterns that she thought was perfect. It was a simple cotton bodysuit, nothing extravagant. When she got home, Diego was in the kitchen, still wearing his chef's uniform. He looked tired, frowning as he checked something on his cell phone. Marisol put the bags on the table and took out the outfit excitedly. "Look what I bought for the baby." Diego looked up, and the look he gave her took her by surprise. "What is that? Baby clothes?" "Look, it's neutral. It works for a boy or a girl." He put his cell phone aside and took the clothes in his hands, examining them with an expression that Marisol found strange. Then, without warning, he threw them on the table with a gesture of contempt. "Why do you buy this nonsense?" She felt a lump in her throat. "Diego, they're just clothes. Why are you spending money on them? We don't even know if we're going to need them." Marisol felt a pang of anger. "What do you mean? Of course we're going to need them." Diego looked at her harshly. "If it's a girl, I don't want to see a single piece of this in my house." The air caught in her throat. For the first time, she felt that her husband was no longer the man she had known. And worst of all, something inside her told her that this was only the beginning. The restaurant was full. Soft background music mingled with the laughter and lively conversation of the guests. The dim lights gave the celebration an elegant air. Waiters walked back and forth with trays of appetizers, and the aroma of freshly prepared food wafted through the room. Marisol tried to smile as she walked among the guests, receiving hugs and congratulations. Her mother was excited, touching her belly tenderly, and her brother Javier kept joking about what it would be like to have a nephew or niece who would inherit his bad mood. But even though Marisol tried to enjoy the moment, a shadow of anxiety loomed over her because Diego had been distant since they arrived at the restaurant. He had barely spoken to her. He didn't hold her hand or hug her as he used to. He kept busy moving from one side to the other, supervising the kitchen and making sure everything was in order. But it wasn't just stress. Every time she looked at him, he was tense, his lips pressed together. his shoulders stiff, with that tense expression that made her feel that something was wrong. Then the voice of the party organizer filled the room. Family and friends, the most anticipated moment of the night had arrived. The conversations gradually died down. As everyone turned their gaze to the giant screen placed in the center of the room, Marisol felt her heart beating fast in her chest. Diego appeared at her side, silent, with his hands in his pockets. The organizer smiled, holding the microphone. "We have waited for this moment with great excitement, and now we will find out if we are expecting a boy or a girl. So let's count down to together." Marisol took a deep breath. Diego did not look at her. 3. The murmuring of the guests grew louder. 2. A lump formed in her throat. 1. And then the screen lit up. A vibrant pink filled the entire image, and the word "girl" appeared in large letters. There was a second of absolute silence, and then an explosion of applause. The women screamed with excitement, the men smiled, and Marisol's mother covered her face with her hands. Her eyes filled with tears. Javier hugged her tightly, but Marisol couldn't move because Diego was standing completely still next to her. He wasn't laughing or applauding. His jaw was tense, his lips pressed so tightly together that they became a thin line. His hands in his pockets looked stiff as if he were holding something back. Marisol felt a chill run down her spine. The sound of the celebration became a distant echo. As she looked at her husband, Diego murmured in a faint voice. He did not respond, his eyes fixed on the screen, but not with surprise, not with excitement, with anger. And then the air changed. The people closest to the couple began to notice his expression. Little by little, the smiles of some faded, and the conversations quieted down. There was something in the air that felt strange. Marisol wanted to take his hand, to make him react. But as soon as she reached out, Diego turned abruptly and left the center of the room without a word, without a smile, without congratulations. Eyes followed him as he walked with heavy steps toward the restaurant bar and poured himself a glass of whiskey. "What the hell is wrong with him?" Javier muttered, frowning. Marisol's mother also noticed and approached her with concern. "Mija, is Diego okay?" Marisol swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. Yes, I just think he's in shock." But her voice trembled as she said it. And then Javier blurted out in a dry voice, "No, that bastard is fine." Marisol felt a pang of fear in her chest, because deep down, she knew her brother was right. Diego wasn't surprised. He wasn't processing the news. He was already furious, and the worst part was that he hadn't yet shown the full extent of his anger. But he would, and when he did, Marisol feared it would be too late. The roar of applause still filled the restaurant, but among the guests closest to the stage, the smiles were beginning to fade. Diego stood motionless at the bar, his jaw tense, his knuckles white from gripping his glass of whiskey. His dark, cold eyes were fixed on Marisol, who was receiving hugs and congratulations, but she could feel his gaze piercing her like an icy blade. Like a knife about to sink into her skin, Marisol's heart pounded, not because she was excited, but because she knew what was coming. And then it burned. The sound of the glass shattering against the bar made everyone turn around. Diego stood to his feet, pushing his chair back violently. "It can't be!" The scream cut through the air like thunder, drowning out the murmur of the crowd. The silence that fell over the restaurant was absolute. Heads turned toward him, some in surprise, others in concern, but Diego saw none of that. He only saw Marisol, and then all hell broke loose. With heavy steps he advanced toward her, his eyes burning with a dark fire, his breathing irregular. His fists were clenched tightly. Marisol instinctively backed away, her body reacting before her mind. Diego's voice was a thread of fear, but he didn't stop, and before anyone could react, his hand flew through the air and slapped her face violently. The blow echoed throughout the room. The impact made her stagger backward. Her cheek burned instantly, but it wasn't just the physical pain. It was the humiliation, the astonishment, the horror of realizing that he had done it in front of everyone. Gasps of surprise filled the room. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Javier was the first to move, but Diego paid no attention to him because he wasn't finished. In a second, Marisol felt his hand grab her arm, his brutal grip hurting her. He pulled her forcefully toward him, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were filled with a hatred she had never before. "You failed me," he spat with fury. "You're not even good for this." Marisol trembled. Fear was a rabid animal in her chest. Her mother's voice rang out among the desperate crowd. "Diego, let her go, you bastard! Leave my sister alone!" Javier tried to move forward, but Diego pushed him hard before he could reach him. The world became a blur as Marisol fell backward, hitting the ground with a groan. Our fear turned into absolute panic. Some women screamed. Other guests stood petrified, not knowing what to do. But Diego wasn't finished. With terrifying speed, he lunged at her. And was already on top of her, holding her by the shoulders and shaking her. "You're going to ruin my life with a girl!" His saliva flew onto Marisol's face as he roared at her. And then came the first blow. Diego's fist smashed into her face. A burst of pain exploded in her cheek, clouding her vision. They grew, but Diego didn't stop. Another blow and another, each more brutal than the last. The sharp sound of fists hitting Marisol's skin echoed through the restaurant, mixing with the horrified sobs of the guests. She tried to protect herself by raising her hands, but he grabbed her wrists with one hand and continued to hit her. "I told you I didn't want a girl." Javier lunged at him with an angry shout. "You bastard! Let her go!" He pounced on Diego, pushing him hard and knocking him to the ground. Marisol gasped for air, her eyes swollen with tears, her face burning with pain. Chaos erupted. Some guests finally moved to intervene, while others called the police with trembling hands. But Diego was not willing to stop. He got up suddenly and punched Javier in the face, causing him to stagger backwards. "You're getting involved where you don't belong." But Javier did not stop. With all his rage, he returned the blow, causing him to fall onto a table full of glasses. The glass shattered, and screams began to be heard in the distance, along with the sound of sirens. Right here, I want to ask you something. If you had been in that restaurant, would you have stepped in or stayed frozen? What would you have done? Tell me in the comments. Marisol, still on the floor, felt the warm blood trickling from her mouth. Everything hurt. Her stomach. A chill of terror ran through her when she remembered the blow she had received to her stomach when she fell. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her baby. "Marisol, calm down. The police are coming." Her mother knelt beside her, her face contorted with fear. But Marisol could barely breathe. Red and blue lights flashed through the restaurant windows. The voices around us became a whirlwind, and everything began to darken. The restaurant was a hell of screams and chaos. Diego breathed with fury, his face contorted with hatred, his hands still tense, his knuckles red, rage boiling in his blood, his gaze still fixed on Marisol, who lay on the floor with her face beaten, her lips split, terror reflected in her eyes. But before he could do anything else, a roar of fury broke through the crowd. "Damn you!" was all that was heard before Javier lunged at him like a wild animal. The impact was brutal. Diego didn't have time to react before Javier's fist crashed into his jaw with all the force of his accumulated hatred. The blow was so violent that it sent him reeling backwards, knocking over a chair. In the process, the guests finally awoke from their shock. "Separate them," someone shouted, but Javier had no intention of stopping. He lunged at Diego again, hitting him with all the rage he felt. "I warned you, you bastard! I warned you!" Javier's fists fell again and again on Diego, unleashing all his pent-up fury. But then Diego managed to break free and returned a brutal blow to his stomach, making him double over in pain. "Don't get involved in what doesn't concern you," Diego growled, his mouth full of blood. "She's my sister, you bastard!" Javier lunged at him again, knocking him to the ground. They rolled around among the broken glass, hitting each other with everything they had, pushing each other against the tables, until finally several men came to separate them. "Enough, you bastards. The police are on their way." Diego tried to free himself from the arms that held him. His face was pure fury and sweat. "We're not done," he spat through clenched teeth. But then the sound of sirens filled the air. The echo of the patrol cars pierced the atmosphere, and the blue and red of the police lights reflected off the restaurant windows. People began to move aside, clearing the way. In a matter of seconds, the officers stormed the place. "On the ground!" ordered one of the policemen, drawing his gun. Diego still tried to resist. "You have no right. This is my house. She's my wife." But the police didn't give him a chance. They subdued him with force, twisting his arms behind his back. The sound of cold metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "Marisol is my wife. No one is going to take her away from me. That girl is not my daughter, bitch." His voice faded as the officers dragged him out of the restaurant, while the guests watched in silence, their faces full of disgust and contempt. But Marisol couldn't hear anything anymore. The world had become blurry. The pain in her belly was sharp, a deep burning that made her gasp for air. Her baby. Her mother knelt beside her with tears in her eyes. "Hang in there, honey. The ambulance is on its way." "Mom," Marisol whispered, her voice broken. "It hurts." Her mother let out a heartbreaking sob and caressed her face with her trembling hands. Then the red lights of the ambulance illuminated the restaurant entrance. The sensation of speed made Marisol dizzy. She could hear the voices of the paramedics around her. Rapid orders, blinding lights on her face, a sharp blow to her abdomen. "We need to check the fetal heartbeat now." The high-pitched sound of the monitor terrified her. She closed her eyes, feeling hot tears running down her cheeks. She didn't care about the pain. She didn't care about the blows to her body. She just wanted to know if her baby was still alive. "Please," she whispered weakly. "My daughter." When she woke up, the white light of the hospital blinded her for a moment. Everything was silent. The smell of disinfectant permeated the air. Her mother was sitting next to her face contorted with grief. Javier, his knuckles bandaged, stared at the floor with contained rage. Marisol swallowed hard. She knew before she asked, by the emptiness in her stomach, by the way her mother took her hand. Unable to say anything, by the way Javier closed his eyes tightly, clenching his jaw, by the weight in her chest, by the silence, by the absence. "No," her voice was a muffled whisper. Her mother broke down in tears. "My daughter, I'm so sorry." And in that moment, everything inside Marisol collapsed. If you believe no one should ever go through what Marisol is living right now, hit the like button so this story reaches more people who might need to hear it. Diego had almost taken everything from her, and the worst part was that even though he was gone, his shadow was still there, destroying her, making her wonder if she would ever feel whole again. The world seemed to have stopped. Marisol opened her eyes slowly, feeling her body heavy, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she could not wake up. The white ceiling of the hospital trembled before her blurred vision. The strong smell of disinfectant and the intermittent beeping of the machines filled the air, but what disturbed her most was the silence. A silence laden with fear. She tried to move her arms, but a sharp pain ran through her body, as if she were broken inside. She tasted the metallic flavor of dried blood on her cracked lips. Her eyes burned, her eyelids heavy from the swelling caused by the blows. Then she realized she was not alone. Her mother was sitting next to her, holding her hand tightly, as if afraid to let go and see her. Her face, marked by the wrinkles of age, was covered with silent tears. Her fingers trembled on Marisol's cold skin. Javier was there too, leaning against the wall, staring at the floor, his knuckles bandaged, his fists clenched, rage bubbling inside him like lava about to explode. Marisol swallowed hard. She wanted to ask, but at the same time she didn't want to hear the answer, because deep down, she already knew. Fear tightened her chest. Her breathing became ragged. A suffocating panic rose in her throat. And then the door opened and the doctor entered. He was a middle-aged man with a serious face and a tired look. He had a folder in his hands, but he didn't need to say anything. The expression on his face said it all. Marisol's heart raced. Marisol's heart was racing. "Mrs. Marisol." His voice was calm, but laden with unbearable weight. "We did everything we could." The world stopped. Her head was spinning. Her chest was burning. And suddenly the room felt too small, too suffocating. "No," her voice was barely a broken whisper. The doctor sighed. The impact was very strong. Her body went into shock, and for a moment we feared the worst. She felt the ground sink beneath her feet. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she was breathless. The doctor paused, and then softened his tone. But your baby is strong. She survived. The room fell silent. Marisol blinked, not immediately understanding his words. Her baby was alive. Air returned to her lungs like a blow. Her whole body trembled. The pressure in her chest transformed into something different, something she didn't know how to explain. Her eyes filled with tears. My daughter, the doctor smiled slightly. Your daughter is a fighter, ma'am. Despite the trauma, the tests show that she is fine. The first tear rolled down Marisol's cheek, followed by another and another. Her baby, her little girl, was alive. I want to see her, she whispered weakly, her lips trembling. Her mother smiled through her tears and squeezed her hand. My daughter, she needs you. The doctor nodded. We'll bring her to you now. Time seemed to stretch out until the door opened again. A nurse entered, holding a small pink bundle in her arms. Marisol held her breath. The nurse approached carefully and, with all the delicacy in the world, placed the baby in Marisol's arms. She was there, small and fragile, with pink skin and closed eyes. Marisol sobbed, "Hello, my love." Her voice broke, trembling with emotion. She rested her forehead against her daughter's and cried. She cried for the fear she felt. She cried for the pain she suffered. She cried because she was alive. She cried because despite everything, she had her daughter in her arms. Javier discreetly wiped his face, looking away. That girl is strong. It couldn't be any other way. Marisol smiled through her tears and looked at her brother. Yes, she is strong, stronger than anyone could imagine. And at that moment, Marisol made a silent promise. She would never again allow fear to control her life. She would never again let anyone else decide her fate. From that moment on, she and her daughter would be free, and Diego would never touch them again. Marisol was still holding her daughter in her arms when reality hit her like a sharp punch. Diego. His name was poison in her mouth, a suffocating weight on her chest. She looked down at that delicate little face, those tiny fingers clinging to the fabric of the blanket. Esperanza, her daughter, her little warrior, had resisted against all odds, against brutality, against violence. She was still alive, but for how long? A cold shiver ran down her spine. If Diego remained free, if he returned, if he tried to take her away, the fear that had previously devoured her like a monster in the dark, it had transformed into something different. Fury, hate. She couldn't allow it anymore. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. Her mother, noticing the change in her expression, touched her hand gently. My daughter. Marisol looked up, and for the first time, something new shone in her eyes. Determination. I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect my daughter. Javier, who had remained silent in the corner of the room, looked up. Marisol, I'm going to report him. I'm going to see this through to the end. Her words were firm, without hesitation. Her mother put a hand to her chest in surprise. Are you sure? Marisol looked at her baby again. I've never been so sure of anything in my life. Hours later, when Marisol could sit up in bed without feeling so much pain, she received a visit from 2 police officers. The officer leading the conversation was a middle-aged man with a face hardened by years of work in cases like hers, cases where men like Diego got away with it. But this time, it would not be so, Mrs. Marisol, the officer began in a serious tone. Your husband has been arrested and is facing charges of aggravated assault. However, the pause was short, but Marisol noticed it. The police officer exchanged a glance with his partner before continuing. Your lawyer is pulling strings to reduce the charges. If you do not file a formal complaint, he could be released on. A chill ran down her spine. How long? Less than a week. Her stomach churned. Less than a week. That was all Diego needed. Marisol remembered the look in his eyes that night, the way his fists dug into her skin, the way he spat hatred when he found out their baby was a girl. If he got out, he would come after them. She couldn't allow that. She took a deep breath and looked the police officer straight in the eye. I want to file a report. The officer who was with him nodded and took out some documents. We'll have to take your official statement. Are you ready for this? She swallowed. No. It wouldn't be easy to relive every moment, recount the details, expose everything Diego did to her. But when she looked at the face of her daughter sleeping in the crib next to her, she knew she had to do it. for the baby who survived, for the woman who refused to live in fear, for all those who never managed to escape. Yes, she replied firmly. I'm ready. The next few hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Marisol recounted everything, every insult, every blow, every veiled threat she had endured in recent months. The officer took notes without interrupting, but her hardened expression made it clear that she had heard stories like this many times before and knew that many women did not have the courage that Marisol was showing. Now, when she finished, the police officer closed her notebook and sighed. With this formal complaint, her husband would face legal proceedings. However, she must be prepared that this could take time. Marisol nodded. I don't care how long it takes. I just want him to never be able to hurt us again. The officer was silent for a moment, and then bowed her head slightly in respect. You are a brave woman, ma'am. Not everyone has the strength to do what you are doing. But Marisol did not feel brave. She just knew she had no other choice, because if she didn't do this now, it might be too late. When the police left, Javier approached the bed and crouched down beside her. Are you sure about this? His voice sounded hoarse. Marisol held his hand. There's no other option, Javier. He nodded, pressing his lips together, then lowered his head and let out a long sigh. If that bastard gets out of jail, I'll kill him myself. Marisol closed her eyes for a second, exhausted. He's not going to get out. Javier laughed humorlessly. You don't know how justice works in this country. Then I'll make it work. He looked at her for a long moment, and then smiled wryly. Yes, I think you will. Marisol smiled too, but deep down, she knew that the fight had only just begun, and she wasn't going to stop until she saw Diego pay for everything he had done. The cry of a newborn baby filled the room. Marisol felt her chest heave, her breath catching with emotion, the sticky sweat on her forehead, the stabbing pain running through her body. It all disappeared the moment she heard that little voice break the silence. She's a strong girl, said the nurse with a smile, wrapping the baby in a pink blanket before placing her in Marisol's arms. And then, for the first time in a long time, Marisol felt whole. She held her daughter gently, with a love so intense that it hurt her soul. Hello, my love, she whispered with a trembling voice. The baby moved slightly, her little eyes and tiny mouth opening in a yawn. She was so small, so perfect, and so hers. Tears rolled silently down Marisol's cheeks. Tears of relief, of victory, of pure love. Next to her, her mother sobbed quietly, covering her mouth with her hands. Javier watched the scene with shining eyes, making an obvious effort not to cry. Marisol looked up at her brother. She's beautiful, isn't she? Javier nodded slowly, his voice raspy when he spoke. Yes, and I hope she doesn't get your bad mood. Marisol laughed through her tears, and Javier smiled sideways, but his face couldn't hide what he really felt. Pride that his sister had survived, that his niece was alive, because after so much pain, they finally had something good, something worth protecting. What's her name? Her mother asked in an emotional whisper. Marisol looked down at the baby and gently caressed her cheek. Her name is Esperanza. Marisol's mother sobbed harder and hugged her carefully. Esperanza, because despite everything, she had never stopped fighting. Because even in the darkness, she had found light. Because her daughter was the symbol of her rebirth. The following months were difficult. And if you want to hear how women like Marisol slowly rebuild their lives after so much pain, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the rest of these stories. Healing was not an easy process. There were nights when Marisol woke up with her body tense, still feeling the fear clinging to her skin like a shadow that was impossible to shake off. Sometimes she found herself looking out the window, afraid that Diego would appear, because the trauma did not disappear overnight. But then she would hear her daughter's laughter and feel her warm skin against her chest when she rocked her to sleep. She saw her little hand clinging tightly to her finger, and that reminded her. Why did she continue to stand with the support of her family? She began therapy for the first time. She spoke aloud about everything she had suffered. She allowed herself to feel. She allowed herself to cry. She allowed herself to heal. Javier helped her find a place to live, small, but hers. Her mother spent the afternoons with her, teaching her about motherhood, making sure she wasn't alone. And little by little, day after day, the fear stopped controlling her life. One day, while she was having coffee at the small table in her apartment, Javier arrived with a mysterious smile. "What do you have?" Marisol asked, raising an eyebrow. Javier took out an envelope and placed it in front of her. "It's a gift." Marisol frowned and opened it. Her eyes scanned the document, her breath stopping when she understood what it was. Her official divorce papers. Approved. Diego was no longer her husband. Freedom had never felt so real. She looked up at Javier with tears in her eyes. "How did you do this so quickly?" Javier smiled smugly. "I have my contacts." Marisol laughed and shook her head. "I don't know what I would do without you." "You don't have to know because I'll be here." She leaned in and gave him a big hug. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Her life was now hers alone, and she would never again let anyone try to take it away from her. The years passed. Time did not erase Marisol's scars, but it turned them into something different. Instead of marks of pain, they were now reminders of her strength. Every blow she suffered, every tear she shed, every sleepless night. It was all part of the woman she had become, a free woman, a woman who would never again be silenced. It was an ordinary morning when Marisol found her. The white envelope was among other pieces of mail, but just seeing the sender's name was enough to make her breath catch. Diego Ramirez. She stood still for a moment, just looking at that name. She felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear, but from disgust, from revulsion at everything he represented. Slowly, she pulled up a chair and sat down at the table. The letter was still unopened, her heart beating fast, but not out of panic. This time was different. She was no longer the terrified woman he had tried to destroy. She took a deep breath, sliding her fingers over the paper, and then, without hesitation, she tore the envelope in half and threw everything in the trash. She didn't need to know what Diego had to say, because he no longer existed for her. Later, as she walked through the park with hope, she watched her daughter run among the trees, her hair flying in the wind, her laughter light as a melody. She was a happy girl, full of life, without fear, and that was all that mattered. "Mommy, come here!" the girl shouted, waving her hand. Marisol smiled. The past was behind her. The future was hers. Over time, Marisol began to tell her story, first in small groups, talking to women who were going through the same thing she had experienced. Then in support meetings, in interviews, at events where each of her testimonies became a source of hope for those who still felt trapped in the cycle of violence. She wanted other women to know what had taken her so long to learn. Love never hurts. Fear should never be normal. There is always a way out. Today, every time she sees another woman find the courage to free herself, she knows that her pain was not in vain, because now she has not only survived, she is living, and she will never stop living. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore more content on our channel. We have many more exciting and thought-provoking stories like this one that seek to inspire you and show you that there is always hope. Click on the following video and join us for another story that is sure to captivate you from the very beginning. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comment, and share this video with those you think may need it. Thank you for being part of this community. See you in the next music video.